Hey everybody, good morning. This is another episode of Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews. Back at you with something that I thought was really interesting to listen to, and I was kind of sad, kind of like with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was kind of sad that it was over because it was a good story in the writing style I appreciated a lot. And the book that we're going to go over today is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. If you like these book reviews, I try to do a book review on every book I read, which could be pretty exhausting sometimes. But if you like these and you want to see more of them, I'd say subscribe. I'd say comment and say oh, have you read this book? Because maybe I'll read that book. But yeah, we're gonna get on to the book review. So Gulliver's Travels is a book. I know I've been getting into audiobooks lately, and I highly recommend audiobooks, especially for busy people who don't have a bunch of hours to sit crisscross applesauce and read books with their eyes. But I've been getting more into audiobooks while I've been driving, while I've been riding my bike, while I've been doing yoga and stretching and stuff like that, where I'm not really thinking too much, but if I think it's safe to listen to a book rather than listening to music where I normally would. And I've been getting through a lot of books doing that, and I would recommend that if you want to read more books, try to think of places where an audiobook would fit, even if you wouldn't normally listen to an audiobook at that time. I go on pretty long hikes, and I've started to listen to audiobooks when I'm going on a hike. And when I get really tired, then I listen to music to kind of pep me up. But if I'm feeling fine, it's a nice day, I'm out by myself, listen to audiobook. So I listened to Gulliver's Travels, which is why I'm bringing that up, and I thought it was done really well. The story style is good, and the particular audiobook that I listened to, which was by Audible, I think they did a good job. But on to the story, where Gulliver's Travels, I think, is very well known, especially from the cover. Almost every cover depicts this one part of the story where Gulliver, the main character, because this is basically this dude's journal that his adventure journal. He goes on all these voyages and adventures, and he's just telling you about his adventures. I think the best known part of this adventure journal that Gulliver's writing is when he gets marooned or shipwrecked or whatever on the island of Lilliput, and there's all these little tiny dudes that are real small, and they capture him. And that's kind of what everybody thinks the story's about, which it's partly about that. I'm not going to say that's not in the book. That's definitely an adventure he goes on, but there's 4 different adventures that Gulliver goes on, and I think they're all interesting, and the adventure in Lilliput is just one of them. But not to get too much into all of Gulliver's different travels, which I'll talk about a little bit, but what I really liked about this book is, I think, on one level, it's this story about Gulliver going on different travels, meeting different people, learning about different cultures and stuff like that. But on another level, Gulliver, he's an Englishman. He's from the UK. And as he's going to these different places, he has to talk to people and learn their language, and he gets in all these conversations about, why does your country do this? Oh, my country does that. Oh, you guys don't have one of those? Well, we have one of these. And it's kind of this comparison of different societies. And I like it because, yes, some people get offended sometimes, or people aren't listening or whatever, but it's a pretty honest dialogue about the differences and the nuances between different societies and why a certain group is like this and why a certain group is like that. And it kind of helps shine a light on some of the stuff that may not make any sense, even though we all think it does make sense. And because we're in it every day. It's like the fish doesn't know it's wet because it's always underwater. But this kind of shows you no, here's some dry land, there's no water over there. Here's some air. There's different places to be. There's different kind of stuff to do. So I really appreciated the contrast between England and the 4 different places that Gulliver traveled to. They were really different virtue systems, really different ways that the laws worked, And one of the things that I liked was they gave a reason why certain things were the way they were in certain societies. So, like, for instance, if the inhabitants had no real natural enemies, they were like the top of the food chain, they didn't really need a bunch of weapons and a bunch of like war strategies, because who were they going to fight? Or if they were like on an island and they were the only people on the island, and again, like, who are they going to fight? And the way the society develops is different depending on if you have neighboring territories that are trying to take over, if you have food shortages, if there's enough for everybody, if there's good land, if there's water available. All these things have to do with how the moral character, how the laws, how the history, and different things evolve inside of a country or a group of people. And I think this does a good job at trying to just look at it, and it doesn't really point the finger at anybody except for England, because that's the only real place in the book. But it brings up these fictional societies and kind of criticizes them and says, hey, this is how they are. Are they good or bad? What's good or bad about them, and why are they acting in these ways? And it kind of gets to the point where it stops even talking about good and bad, and it just talks about why is it like this, where we're not even trying to say this is good, this is bad. We're just saying, hey, what's going on? There's a lot of interesting ideas in this book. I really like the idea of yahoos. If you read the book to the end with the Huinen, which is the name of the race that Gulliver meets, that also they have to deal with the yahoos. But the way that this story is crafted, there's always these really fantastic elements about each society, and the fantastic elements, like with the Lilliputians, they're all this big. That really plays into how they treat Gulliver, how they treat each other, how their laws work, and all that kind of stuff. Where sometimes a culture develops a certain way because of a certain staple crop. Like if your staple crop is bananas and it has to be grown in tropical rainforests, maybe you have to develop your whole community around rainforests or jungles or something like that. And that has a lot to do with how you've established your laws and all that stuff, because when you're living in the jungle, you have to live a certain way. Or if your natural food is rice, that's the most abundant thing, then maybe you have to develop your society a different way. So I really appreciated this story for that reason, and then also for just looking at kind of the different quirky parts of the different civilizations that Gulliver encountered. One of them was the Laputians. I don't know if you guys have heard of Laputa. Hayao Miyazaki did a really interesting movie called Castle in the Sky, and it was his rendition on Laputa, but I think it comes from this book, where there's this like floating castle in the sky that's based on like magnets and stuff like that. But if you live in a floating island, then maybe the rules for how you live are different than if you're living on an island that's stuck in the water, or if you're living in a mainland continent. And I just think it's interesting to see how the different situations that people get put in lead them to different belief systems, lead them to different thinkings of right and wrong, and even different ideas. So the book Gulliver's Travels, I think, is really worth a read, and I think it's worth to reading it and thinking about like how you think your daily life is normal, what stuff you think is good and bad in your personal life, in your family, in your job, in your community, in your nation. Think about how the things are working or not working, and then like reading the book, like comparing them, how Gulliver is comparing them to the places that he's running into, and saying like, oh, okay, I'm doing this, but you're doing that. Oh, why would you do this? Because I do that. And not necessarily saying I'm better or you're better, but just like, what can I learn here? So the book, I think, is about adventures on one level, but on another level, I think it's about how people live their lives differently, and not how we can force each other to be the same, but how we can learn from each other and try to see where there's common ground. So the book is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. I thought it was a good book, and the language it wasn't written in this century. It was written like, I don't know, 17, 1800s or something like that. So the language is a little bit dated, like the way he talks, but I think after the first or second chapter, you can get used to that, and it's not that big a deal. It's kind of like how Yoda in Star Wars, he talks a little bit different, but you listen to him for a few minutes, and you're like, okay, I get what you're saying. So if you're saying like, oh, this book is written crazy, I'm not gonna read it because of that, that's not an excuse. It's like how Shakespeare writes a little bit strange, but it's just like he has an accent or a dialect or whatever. And you know, I'm from California. I have my accent. If I talk to somebody from like Louisiana or from New York or from England, they're gonna have a different accent. It might take me a second, or dialect. It might take me a second to understand what they're saying, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth talking to them because they speak a little different than me. And I think in this book, Gulliver speaks in a different way because he's from a different time, and that's all good. But I would encourage you to check the book out. If the reading is a little daunting because of that, try listening to it, because I think this book is worth it. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you've read this book or if it's had any impact on you. What was your favorite place? Was it the land of the Huinem? Was it the Lilliput? Was it Laputa? What was the other one? I forget the other one, but it's the one with the giants. But what was your favorite one and why? But or England, I guess. But this has been Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews with another book review, in this case on Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. And even if you don't read this book, I hope that these videos, these reviews, encourage you to read something soon. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later.